courage, creativity, and the power of change. Welcome back to Flashpoint with Rich Cardona, where I interview industry leaders, hypergrowth entrepreneurs, and veterans and share their life lessons with you. Courage and creativity are the fundamental pieces of Beth Comstock's book, Imaginative. And there you have it. Beth was the CMO of GE. Ultimately, she was the vice chair, and now she's written a book after a trailblazing career, and that's why you see her here hanging out with Gary Vee. That's why you see her everywhere doing interviews, panels, speaking engagements. Everyone wants to talk to Beth. And I can tell you, I understand why now after interviewing her. Beth is real, she's animated, she's humble, and you just have so much to learn from her. So, as expected, our interview went fantastic, and I avoided asking all the standard questions, and Beth did not disappoint. She was completely unwrapped, and I really hope you all enjoy this podcast. What I want to tell you about Beth is, despite her corporate career, she's always tied back to her rural roots in Winchester, Virginia. She loves the outdoors, and she's going to tell you about all the fun things she used to do as a kid and all the things that still apply to her as an adult. Enjoy Beth's discovery phase on Flashpoint. I'm here with Beth Comstock. This is Rich Cardona, and this is Flashpoint. It's been a long time I've been trying to get this done, and I appreciate you just honoring the emails and just saying, I will get back to you, don't worry, we'll make this happen. And I'm just really thrilled. Now, I could definitely say Beth is known for all these things. But how would you describe yourself? Because you have a lot of different labels, but if you were just talking to me for the very first time, how would you describe yourself?
Well, it's changed even in the past year how I describe myself. First of all, thanks, Rich. It's been great to get to know you, and I'd say she keeps her commitments would be one way I'd hope people would get to know me. But the story I tell of myself has changed in the past year. I mean, I'm a ex-company person, a storyteller, somebody who gravitates to change. And right now I am freed from a company and trying to figure my way in the world and figure out what's next.
You say freed, and I kind of understand the connotation there where, you know, it's almost like a liberating experience. Now that you're, quote unquote, alone and unafraid.
Yeah, well, I'm alone and afraid.
Alone and afraid.
Which is not necessarily always a good place to be, because there's something about being afraid with others. We can come back to that. In companies, we're always afraid to show our fear.
Yep.
But there is something very powerful about being able to share your concerns and fears with others. And that's one of the things I found very challenging in the past year, where I have been a bit on my own. I had a book come out called Imaginative, but it was a very entrepreneurial endeavor. But you have a question, you don't know who to turn to. And so alone, I think, can make those fears even more irrational.
I agree. And then the other videographer here, we were talking on the way over here, and he's like, I just kind of want to be part of a team. And it's just one of those things where if the three of us are on a team, I might not be able to solve a problem, but you might. And I learned from that because of it. And it's just a better atmosphere, especially if it's supported. Now, this leads me to another question. When you're talking about it's entrepreneurial, now that you're not with the organization, I find that I'm able to choose who I want to be around and work with, and it's different. How have you gone about expanding your network, so to speak, and surrounding yourself with the people who would support your entrepreneurial venture?
Yeah, well, I think you do have to always, to me, one of the things I'm proudest of in my career is that I was able to build a really strong network. I'm a more reserved, even shy person. I've had to overcome that. But so it's even more, makes it more of a sense of pride for me, because it meant I had to get out of my own way. But you have to renew those connections or decide they no longer work for you. That's one thing. I mean, renew them means, hey, Rich, how you doing? I haven't talked to you in a while. Hope everything's well. I saw this article. I thought of you. Here you go. And expecting nothing back in return, just that connection. And then as you're starting to go out to learn, to me, like part of the beauty of life and what I learned in a career is just learning. And so I think, to me, approaching and building new connections in your network is to say, I think I can learn from you. Here's, I'm trying to be a better entrepreneur. Right now, I'm really big on creativity and creative courage. So I've been reaching out to people who have more creative kinds of expression and say, you know, I left a big company job of trying to restart my creativity. Can I come and just talk to you about how you work?
Exactly.
Most people don't mind, especially if you're just saying, let me just hang around. I'm not
Yes.
asking for you to create something special for me.
Yep.
Just work me in, share a little bit of insight. And most people are happy to tell their story and have a connection if they understand where you're coming from.
I interviewed Dory Clark a while ago, and we talked about networking, and we talked about it in the veteran space as well. And there's just like that feeling like I'm just asking for something.
Yeah,
like I'm
it sounds so
supposed to,
cheesy.
Yeah,
right?
like I'm gonna ask Beth for this thing, and do I need to suck up to her? And we just talked about it, and it really just needs to be reframed into relationship building. Like I appreciate what you do. I'm not asking for anything.
Yeah.
I'd like to learn a little bit. And
Yeah.
if there's anything I could do for you, let's do it. And then it's much less, disingenuous or not disingenuous.
And then at some point, if there is some kind of business transaction, you've gotten to know each other, you know the sincerity. I mean, I think why we don't like the networking concept is we all imagine these horrible meetings where everybody goes in and, hi, I'm Beth Comstock, nice to meet you. And then once you establish there's no connection, you're like, you drop each other, right?
Yeah.
Or you're just collecting business cards or something, and you think you're going to call up and make a sale. And I know, and I saw this I worked for decades at GE and I worked with some great people, but also people who are like, I don't have time for that.
Yep.
I don't have time. Or they won't do things like LinkedIn because I don't want to be spammed by people looking to sell me or looking for a job. I think, well, what a missed opportunity.
Yes.
Sure, there's some of that, of course.
Yep.
You don't have to connect with those people, but think of the opportunity to recruit, to connect, to learn. And so I think if you reframe it as I'm going to learn,
Yes.
I'm going to connect with people in a new way. I think it's a much different experience than, hey, hi, Rich, give me your card and I'm going to hit you up for a sale.
Yeah, and no one keeps the business cards anyway.
Yeah.
I kind of stopped and I'm like, here, you can scan my phone because LinkedIn does that now.
Yeah.
I don't even like that approach, but yeah, I think you're definitely right.
Well, it's cheap. It just feels so,
It
it's,
is.
because it's just transactional. And you
Yes.
said the word earlier. If you take it as relationship building, it's much different than
Absolutely.
transactional. And I think people like, yeah, time is money, but some things take time to develop.
Yes, that's interesting. My wife was a director of partnerships, and she had this extraordinary patience. She's like, yeah, I've been working with them for 8 months. I'm like, any day now, like, I really think. She's like, no, and now they never want to stop doing business with her. It's just really interesting.
And it's interesting as an entrepreneur or somebody who has a small company, I think you have to weigh that. It's almost like you need a portfolio.
Yes.
I worked with one small company founder, and he had a rule when I was at GE. He's like, look, I've wasted a lot of time with big companies. I have a 3-meeting rule. Like, first I have to feel good, but after 3 meetings, if we're not substantially moving forward, we're just going to call it quits. And on one hand, I appreciated because big companies can lead small companies along and never have any intention.
Yes.
But at the same time, it does take time. So good for your wife, eight months later,
Yeah.
still feeling like there was something worth
100%.
pulling on. So I think you have to trust your gut in some of those moments.
Yeah, that 3-meeting rule is something I've never heard, but I kind of appreciate it as well. Like, let's just get to business.
Yeah,
So
especially if you're a small company with a big company, I think it's like, hey, my time's valuable too.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, if you're a small company, I think you have to maybe realize 3 meetings, we're just scratching the surface.
Exactly.
If people bring so many people to meetings, they got to find the right champion.
there's just endless meetings and that's one of the things they do here at Science House is model meetings. They dissect meetings. Rita told me that when people brought them on initially, they're like, innovate for us. And she goes, let me just observe. And by chance, they started dissecting meetings, and they're just like, the right people aren't even in the room.
No.
There's people who don't need to be there.
Right. But they feel like they're going to miss out if they're not in the meeting, but they contribute nothing.
Exactly. If you're general counsel, you are preparing to hear something legal related so you can make yourself worthwhile. Yeah. So I think that's interesting. I'm going to completely shift gears now because I've just moved up to Northern Virginia, Leesburg area, Lansdowne, and I love it. And before that, I was in Blackstone. But you grew up in Winchester? In
Winchester, Virginia, the Shenandoah Valley.
Yes, let's talk about it because...
Not far from Leesburg.
Yeah, so tell me about your upbringing and where, if any time, there's pivotal moments where you realize, I'm a creative person.
Well, I growing up in a small town, Winchester's much bigger than when I grew up there, but I think there's so much to be said about knowing where you came from and appreciating where you came from. And I've always carried I live in New York City, but I've always carried my small town with me wherever I go. I just love that town because it helped make me who I am.
Yes.
And back to this power of connection. I mean, it's also, there's some negative side to it. In a small town, everybody knows your reputation.
Yes.
And so it's sometimes hard to overcome the story that people want to put on you. But I remember growing up in my neighborhood, and we just ran in packs of kids, and we were like free range kids.
Yes.
We just ran around, and we were very creative in nature. And so those two things came together. I remember, we'd play out stories that we had read or books we had read, and we'd create, like Boxcar Children was a big one. We'd go in the fields and we'd create our little boxcars, and we'd find little pine cones and turn them into things. So to me, nature and creativity came from kind of this group play that all the kids, all ages, it was like big kids, little kids, we were just in our element. So that's mostly what I think of when I think back to growing up there, and what if it spurred creativity, it was that. My dad was also, he later became an artist, but I think perhaps finding his artistic expression, and so he pushed me a lot to take art, be in art classes, do those kinds of things. So I think I had that extra push from my dad.
And I think I listened in one of your interviews that you went to school. You said you wanted to do a science project or something like that. It's a really interesting story, and can you kind of retell that?
Yeah. Well, I was, I think I was in high school, and there was I think it's one of the most formative classes I've ever had. I was a senior in high school, and there was an experimental class called Humanities, and it was at public high school, John Hanley High School in Winchester, Virginia. And David Larrick was the teacher.
You never forget the teacher's name.
I loved him. I loved this class. It was philosophy and literature, and we had a thesis. This is high school, public high school. And so I just wanted to understand why we think, how we think. And so I spent my year in studying the brain in the local library of the hospital. I probably only understood like 2% of these neurology textbooks.
Yes.
But I was just so fascinated in the why, the how we think, and that gave me an outlet for just thinking differently. And in some ways it shaped a lot of my life. I mean, I think I went forward and studied biology and psychology and anthropology, and became a marketer. I think it's because the why. Why do we behave how we do? What is it? So all that I can point back to that moment.
Very interesting. So rural Virginia, essentially, just a lot of creativity. And then a lot of us know your story. So you ascended, you are kind of known as a powerhouse in the industry. When you come to a place and you're doing bigger things in a bigger place like New York, and just moving forward, like, did you ever feel a detachment from who you were? I know you said where you came from still plays a large part, but was there any nights or days where you're just like, who am I anymore? You're in the urban jungle.
Sometimes, I mean, I think I made an intentional declaration to myself that I have to leave this place to go and explore the world, to go forth. So I chose to move. I went to school in my state, William and Mary. I mean, I loved the comfort of what I knew.
Yes.
But I had to make a conscious decision. I mean, I went to Richmond, Virginia. That was the big city to me. Then Washington, D.C. And every step you're starting to feel a little more overwhelmed. And I could only ever dream that I'd end up in New York City.
Yes.
And I think it's like anything. Once you break it down into small pieces, you realize you build your way around, you make friends, and the bigness becomes small. It's your neighborhood. It's the people in the corner store. So I think at first it's daunting, but once you get there and you kind of break it down, it becomes just like your hometown in some ways.
Yes.
It's your neighborhood.
I agree. And so I'm a first generation American. And when I was in New Jersey growing up, I'm like everyone just kind of stays here. And it was my first self-aware moment. I'm like, I have to go do something
Where
else.
did you grow up in New Jersey?
Morristown. And then I went and enlisted in the Marine Corps, and I did that a year out from graduating. And it's just kind of like, you just know sometimes where you have to, I don't think there's growth unless you leave your comfort zone. That is where the most growth happens. So I now want to get into your book, and not the book itself, although it is fantastic. you said in one of our correspondences, 4 years in the making. For people who want to share their ideas, who have something to say, what do you say to them when they are, paralyzed by the fear of actually putting something down on paper?
Yeah. Well, I think the best thing to start is just start close to home. What's your story? When you go to a networking event, if you want to really freak people out, just go, "Hi, Rich, what's your story?" Ask me anything. Just don't ask me that. But I think you started out that way, right? You asked me, what's my story? Small town girl, wanted to see the world, worked for one of the biggest companies on earth. Here I am, right? So I think you have to know your story. And it's just simple. I mean, I think a story is, where did you come from? Where are you going? You don't have to be there yet. In fact, you're probably never really going to get there. And you're opening yourself up to say, here are my aspirations. Here's what I've done right. Here's what I've done wrong. You have to do that very succinctly. But I think that's really the power that you're talking about, is kind of unlocking your story. And so from there, I think for me, I realized I wanted to document the story of change and innovation in a very big company, GE. And that's what led me to write my book. I felt I had experienced a story. I am a storyteller, and I had something to say. So I think that's the other thing, like, what's your purpose in telling the story? So that the book, is it just to catalog something? There was a little of that, but it was more than the marketer in me is like, what problem do I think I'm trying to solve, or what need will this story address? And to me, it was targeting people mid to early career who were trying to make change happen, trying to get a better outcome in their organization, but needed some inspiration, some tools, some encouragement to do so. And so I had to take myself back to early to middle career and go, what were the stories you told yourself then? What can you share, and what have you learned since then that if you could go back in time, you'd do differently?
So when you have your story and you are ready to write it, at some point, these parallel paths need to converge. And that other path is, you feel almost an obligation to share something that is going to be valuable to someone. When you decided, I need to share this with people, who did you think would read it and benefit from it, and why?
Well, I hoped anyone who works in businesses trying to navigate change would find it useful. But I especially wanted people who were maybe first-time managers or wanted to manage a team of people. And it's the challenges you have to come up across, the gatekeepers, the people who say no just because it's a new idea. And we've all been there. How do you work around that? How do you sell an idea? How do you get people excited? How do you get people excited about your idea? How do you deal with defeat? How do you handle conflict? I mean, basic issues, but I felt I wanted people who were kind of coming up in their career to be able to say, you know what, I can do this too. It's okay if I mess up in doing this.
There's a point where you mention how you just have this just deflated attitude when you were in meetings and you felt like some of the people had no idea what they were talking about. And you're like, why didn't I say something? So we're talking about humanity and human beings and fear. Why are people who have value to add reluctant to share their idea, and what would you tell them to do in order to have the confidence to overcome that?
Yeah, well, so for me, it was a couple of things. One, I did lack confidence. I still think it's something I struggle with, but especially early in my career. And I have had to overcome some shyness. I'm also an introvert. And so those things my natural course was to not speak up. And then there was exacerbated, well, if I say this, they're going to think it's stupid. That's the confidence issue. Or I'm not an expert in this. How could I possibly have a point of view to compete with these people who know what they're talking about? So there are all these little voices that go in our head to tell us, just be quiet, just take it in. And then you hear all the other questions. And you're like, I had a good question. I have a good point of view. And then I would leave the meeting incredibly frustrated at myself, especially like, you did not speak and you missed your opportunity. And so enough of that, I finally had to say, stop it. You got to put yourself out there. Your ideas are as good as the next person. Just try it. I do my homework before I went to the meeting. Today's topic is this. What are 3 questions I have? I think the other thing is to come back to your strengths. I couldn't try to compete with the CFO or the legal counsel and give a legal opinion. I have no expertise there. To me, it was about what's the customer, what's the external trend, or just know how to ask a good question. And so those were the things I had to feel confident that I could do and bring that to bear. And I'd say try it in smaller venues before you go to like the board meeting. So try it with your team, try it with your organization before you then go to the big meeting where you might want to be a little more reserved in asking questions.
So when I interviewed Rita, we talked a little bit about the same thing, and I think something that we do is we project all these scenarios that are going to evolve from if I say this or when I do that. What was a turning point for you where you started to gain confidence? Because you do not seem like someone who lacks confidence, who doesn't like to talk, but I understand because I don't like to network. I'm an introvert in public, but in this type of venue, I could talk all day. But what was a turning point for you where you were like, you know what, that's it, like here I go?
Well, there were a number of them. It's funny you say that. My younger daughter said to me recently, I don't think you're really an introvert. I think you just say that. I'm like, because I was reading her I was going through old papers and I was reading feedback I'd gotten in high school and people were like, you're so quiet. And she's like, I didn't think that was real. I'm like, because she knows me as her mother. Like,
hold on a second. Why were you reading high school stuff?
I've been cleaning out the hoard stuff. I was cleaning out old papers and I found this personality class and I kept them. Like 15-year-old girl, what were people saying about me? And many of them were, you're quiet. So I've always been that kind of person, right? So I think that's part of the issue is you have to recognize that sometimes your nature holds you back. And so I had a couple of those epiphanies where I would leave a meeting and I once had my boss, Jeff Immelt at GE. I had just been promoted to chief marketing officer. And he called me into his office and he said, hey, look, like, I expect you to show up. Like, you're in these meetings, you're not saying anything. What happened to you? I put you in this job for a reason. And I think partly I was in a new role. I was in a more senior role. I was trying to observe a little bit and learn.
But that's normal.
But I also think I had a strength to play from. And so I had to bring that in. So I think that there are those moments when people call you out for it. And those moments when you have those reckoning of, I missed that opportunity. And you have to deal with it.
That's interesting because I agree that you had the right approach though. So there's constant turnover in the military. So I know I'm not going to have the same commanding officer for more than 2 years. Like eventually he or she's going to be replaced. So they come in and it's like the ultimate rule of thumb, the unwritten rules, just don't say anything for a while. Just observe the squadron, observe the unit, observe the battalion and see. Because there's probably great ideas floating around everywhere already, but if you come in and in the first 30 days you're like, we're going to do this, this, and this, like you don't know anything yet. So I think you were doing what was right, but do you think maybe you could have benefited from a little bit more of expectation management where the conversation would be like, Beth, like I know you're new, observe, but crush it.
Yeah, probably. But at this point, I was probably 6 months into my job, my new role. And I'm a big believer in what you said. I believe you got to take at least 90 to 100 days in any new assignment, and really even a year to get the full sense of it. But I think also he was like, you're in a senior role, and I put you here for a reason, and I expect you to challenge a little bit. And he was right. I mean, so both things were right. I agree with you 100%. I think it's really kind of weird sometimes when people come in just trying to make their mark and have an opinion without taking time to learn. And boy, you can't drive change in a situation like that because people are like, wait a minute, you haven't taken the time to get to know us. I'm okay with your opinion, but first get to know us before you exert one.
I think that's a really good perspective. I love to shift roles, so now we're going to get into some of your passions right now. You wrote me that you're kind of in a discovery phase. Everything we talked about is gone now, so what is happening right now and what kind of things are going through your mind on a day-to-day basis?
Well, I left my big company job a year ago in December, so December 2017, and I had declared I'm going to take a gap year, and then I had my book that I put out, and that ended up being a really crazy job. So this year I'm off to figure out what's next, what's new.